Hey guys, GhazzyTV here with another Path of Exile video. In this one, we're going to give you the TLDR and my takes on the things that stood out the most with the patch notes leading into 3.16 Scourge Rip Syndicate Operatives. That is the name of the patch notes, and we're going to read through all of it. No, we're not going to do that. We're going to give you the TLDR list. I hope you guys enjoy this format. You should read the entire patch notes. It is about 5 Bibles long, as you can see here, zoomed out. It is an insanely long patch notes. Chris Wilson did mention eons ago that patch notes would be moving forward a lot shorter and much less content, so that they could, make sure that they get things in time. And then, as expected, every patch note they ever released after that has been, super long. On the other hand, though, in his defense, the changes have been kind of needed, and decisions and changes in their approach has changed quite drastically since he said that. So even if that was the original plan, I think that these patch notes have been required. Either way, so I'm going to go through a little bit of a note list I made for these changes that stood out the most for me. So I'm going to go through the labyrinth changes. So the labyrinth changes up here. Basically, they are removing the need or the necessity for going through all the trials. You have full access at level 68 or higher to enter the Eternal Labyrinth, as long as you still have to pay that tribute to the goddess thingy. You get them from doing an actual trial. So you can either buy it or get them from other sources, or do one trial and then you can actually go into the Eternal Labyrinth. I think this is a great change, even more so for Soul Self-Found, but I think it's a really good change to ease up on the necessity and the struggle of finding all of these goddamn trials. I think it's really good. The other change that stood out really well for me was the Delve changes. Delve changes, the TLDR of these are very straightforward. Basically, they are doing a number shrink. Basically, what happens in games like World of Warcraft when they introduce multiple expansions and your damage numbers goes up to the millions, they just do a fucking number shrink on everything and bring everything down. That's essentially what they've done with Delve. They now is saying that depths around level 500 or 500 depths is the same difficulty as previous leagues had around depth 1000. And if you go depth 1,500, that would be as difficult as depth 6,000. So the scaling of this is actually insane. And they're also adjusting the reward structure for this. There's a couple of other things happening with availability of very rare dropping random items with a fractured modifier, such as +1 Spectre with the Delve specific modifiers, and other things that can drop as well, Minion damage and rings, and all of these things as well, +2 aura gems and stuff like that. It's going to be pretty cool to see. So Delve in itself has been significantly buffed. There's also another, the catch-up mechanic. If you didn't do Delve at all, and you level your character to level 90, you're going to start at depth 100, I think it was. So there's a lot of different buffs to delving, and I think that's really, really good and should be mentioned in this little TLDR. I'm going to do my best to just power through my entire notes to not waste your time. So we're going to go directly to the fact that Expedition is going core. If I can find that somewhere. Expedition Changes. Expedition Changes, they are going core. Basically, they are non-tradable currencies that you get from completing the expeditions in maps, which I think is great, because now you are forced to actually interact with the mechanic to make some profit out of it, and you don't have to worry about losing potential money from buying something from the vendors rather than selling the currency that you use to trade it. I think this is a great change, both for casual players as well as high-end players alike. They are also moving away Pirandas and moving the Piranda-specific uniques, not the map that's gone, but the uniques into the core drop pool. I think this is a great change. I'm not a big fan of the Pirandas League. I find it rather dull and boring. And having Expedition in there with the changes they've done to it is very, very nice. It's also an automatic pickup of the currency orbs used for Expedition, or the currency items. So I think that the change to that is really cool. It's going to be fun to see what we can do when it comes to the map Atlas region passive trees for these different expedition modifiers as well, which is stated in the patch notes if you want to read about them. The aura changes was pretty significant as well. Basically, they're making a lot of auras, making it very hard to stack tons of auras, and making it very easy to have just a couple of auras. There's a lot of changes with this, and I don't want to say too much, but I do want to wait and see what they have to do with Path of Building, because there's a few things we haven't gotten the information about. A lot of nodes have been changed from medium clusters into small clusters, and the same goes for curse changes. This has been stated in their previous manifesto that we covered some time ago. And the problem is that we're lacking information of the exact details of what the new notables actually does. So I can't really say much till we get that information. I was hoping that would be in the patch notes, but honestly, getting patch notes this early is unheard of. So I'm just going to take what I can get and say I love the changes so far that I've seen when it comes to these stuffs. curse things in Aura's classes are definitely hurting the support playstyle a lot, but they're introducing a new way of playing support with the link skills, which seems to be a more active playstyle and seems to be pretty fun, actually. I might actually try it out. But it definitely improves certain aspects of a single curse build, especially chaos-oriented builds, when it comes to small clusters actually having offensive cluster jewels now. So that actually sounds really cool, and I actually like the approach of that. I'm going to talk about elemental minions last, I think. How about that? The other notes I have is skill tree changes. They're making some extensive changes to the skill tree where clusters of nodes on the tree are more in line with their thematic approach to one singular theme rather than being split. So traps and mines, for example, there's one for traps, one for mines, instead of having a split with them. I think this is really cool, and they're introducing a thing called mastery. So when you spec a notable in the cluster, you'll get access to spending one skill tree point on the mastery in that cluster. That will give you access to choosing, or to choose one mastery node for that type of archetype or themed node. So for example, minions, they will have a set different masteries you can spec from, and each cluster that you go into on the tree allows you to choose, if you spec that point into mastery, choose one of those masteries. For example, one of them has minions leech 1% of their damage, another one has 30% increased minion life. And so some of these changes are really cool. There are a lot of the cool mechanics or node modifiers from certain notables has been moved into masteries, so you don't have to go out of your way to an uncomfortable routing to pick up that last fire damage cluster or whatever if you want to get a specific modifier, because those specific ones have been moved into a mastery category. So I think this is really cool. It's going to be very fun to see. It also allows for higher end builds to get more of a focus on cluster jewels rather than being pigeonholed in the idea that you have to move around the tree so much to get certain specific nodes. I think this will increase the variety in the way builds are played in general thanks to the mastery. So I'm very hyped about that, and it's very fun to see how it goes. Another change of the tree is the life access on the tree changes. There's absolutely insanely needed and way overdue. A lot of the life's been taken away from the life scion area in the middle of the tree and been scattered around everywhere else, where there's more life to be picked up in other areas, most specifically on the ranger and shadow area. So I think that's going to be really good for the sake of defense, but also in the generic approach of building builds in general. Another thing is the offensive clusters that have been changed have pretty much been taken away and replaced almost exclusively by defensively focused cluster jewels. So it's going to be very fun to see the details on this, which we are currently lacking. There's been crazy changes with Awakened gems. The Awakened gems have been losing their kind of identity a little bit. A lot of people in the original state, we used 20% quality to get that extra effect, where some gems like the Awakened Hex Touch require level 5, it was called Awakened Curse and Hit, to get additional curse, for example. These things were nerfed and turned into just a little bit stronger version of the original 2020 gems. Now they're reintroducing that. So there's a lot of changes here. I'm just going to outline a couple of them. And the fact that they have added fire damage, for example, gives +1 level of socketed physical gem from level 5. Another one is cold penetration, fire penetration, light penetration. They have socketed skills, have 10% chance to inflict exposure of its element on hit at level 5. This requires a lot of investment, either through the facetter's lenses or just leveling the gem up manually, but they will get this extra cool effect when you bring the gem to level 5. This is really nice content for the mid-range to the higher end players, because I don't think the casual players will ever use Awakened gems or even bring them to level 5. And making minion damage is the best one out of these, because it's minions. Jokes aside, +1 level of supported minion skill is significantly better than anything else I've seen here. I think the only thing that is comparable to this would be the melee physical, which has now regained its 10% chance to get intimidate on enemies at level 5. So it's again level 5 is gating this extra effect. I think that's a fair change. I think it's really good to see that these things are being reintroduced to the Awakened gems, as it provides them with a much better value, and they become way more attractive on the market, but also attractive for your builds to be used. Melee strike range was another thing that was changed. The changes here is that they're removing a lot of the melee strike range from the actual inherited abilities and they're moving a lot of the sources onto the tree. Now, we don't have the exact information about this yet, but I think this is a really cool change. In general, my only problem with this is that Dominating Blow was taken under the fucking gun here and removed melee strike range from. Problem with Dominating Blow builds is that they do not invest into nodes on the tree that scales the actual strike ability, because they focus on defensive scaling and minion nodes, so they won't actually ever get that extra melee strike range, which is inherently a nerf to Dominating Blow. I think the other changes seems to be pretty cool, but without knowing the exact amount of increased attack range we're going to get from other sources, I can't say if this is a buff or nerf, but it is definitely a nerf to Dominating Blow. The other changes was Totem Changes. Totem Changes were pretty nasty for the sake of Forbidden Right. It's so much that I don't want to give you guys any numbers or say that Forbidden Right Totem, for example, or Dark Pact Totems is dead or not. I have to check the POB. Basically, they've made it so that totem life has been reduced by around 60%, but they've made changes so that totems can survive by taking 80% less damage, but they also take more damage from themselves, which means Dark Pact and Forbidden Right. I think this is a really good change in general, because totems have always had problems with surviving. So with problems surviving, then this change will hopefully adjust that. On the other hand, it will definitely impact the damage application that you can do from RF Totems, Dark Pact, or Forbidden Right. But we also have to keep in mind that Forbidden Right was able to clear tier 16 maps and endgame bosses with a 1-socket Soul Mantle, so maybe it's not as bad as you think. So I'm gonna wait till we get more PoB updates, and we're gonna dig through the numbers to see how hurt Forbidden Right actually got. It definitely is a big damage drop, but how big, it's time we'll have to tell. Next up is the Dark Pact, actually. You see, Dark Pact has been buffed across the board on every single post they've made. We have better leeching on Energy Shield for the hybrid approach that the Dark Pact self-cast build does on Skellies. We have easier access for Spell Block, because the build is designed to tank 100% deli maps on a medium budget. They also have better access to certain minion nodes thanks to the masteries. They have the ability of linking to the AG for even better approach of damage, and defense for that matter, if you want that. You have better physical mitigation. You have Kingmaker not being gutted. You have the fact that they are increasing the base percent damage taken to Skeleton's life. Instead of 6%, it is now 8%, which further emphasizes on the damage. A low-budget Dark Pact build in a Tabula Rasa day 1 gear reaches about 5 million Shaper DPS. On day 2 gear, you can have 12 million Shaper DPS. In high budget, you can do between 50 and 100 million Shaper DPS. This is before these buffs. And the buffs went through both the sustainability, defense, and offense. I think Dark Pact will be an insane build in 3.16, reading through these notes. Obviously, we'll have to design the build and test it out a little bit. But theoretically, from what I've read, Dark Pact will be crazy. They talked about underused abilities that was buffed. In these, they talk about Voltaxic Burst, Explosive Concoction, and Ambush. I think that the underused abilities being buffed is something that we've been screaming for, but this is not it. The buffs to Absolution was pretty good on the sake for the sake of the 25% chance to summon a Sentinel on hitting a rare or unique. It was previously only on unique, so that's a good way to sustain and keep up the minions. The problem is that Absolution will, despite that and the increased radius, be absolutely dog shit still, no matter how you do it, because of the lack of area coverage, as well as damage output in general, which is only really solved by having more minions to make it a proper caster version of Dominating Blow, which is simply not happening in these patch notes. I still think that Absolution would be a very bad ability to use. I'm happy to be proven wrong on this, though. Other than that, the other note I made was actually Atziri, of all bosses, one of my favorites from 7 or 8 years ago. They have made a very lazy, simple, but effective drop solution. Atziri's Disfavor is simply an item that no longer fits the power level of a unique item from the Uber Atziri fight. So their solution is to make the axe drop from regular Atziri instead, and have Pledge of Hands drop from Uber Atziri as a result. I think that it's a very simple yet lazy solution, because it's rather effective. It gets the job done. The problem is obviously that with the insane amount of access to divination cards, having target farmable uniques like this becomes kind of whatever when we have that much access to div cards, because the div cards don't drop specifically from these bosses, they drop from everywhere else, pretty much. Another good change we see in the patch notes is Unveiled crafting modifiers. This is a big one. Unveiled modifiers are now in a situation where you only need to unveil a craft once. And they're making rarer crafts less rare. So you'll have to only unveil it once to actually have it accessible on your bench, and the rare ones will be more commonly seen, so you can actually more of a reasonable time frame collect as most, if not all, crafting bench mods from the Unveiled system. So I think that's a really cool way to do it. There's a pretty nasty change to Oshabi. Basically, the Sacred Blossom, which apparently is still in the game. Don't ask me. I haven't seen any of the fragments since they changed this. Very few people have. And that's been a bit annoying considering how bad the drops are from the fights. They're changing that. And the big drop from the boss is the Forbidden Shaco. The problem is that that is completely in the shadows of the replica Forbidden Shaco. So instead of fixing the rarity of actually accessing this boss, which I was hoping they would do, they actually made the reward from the boss extremely sought after. Solution was very simple. Delete the replica Forbidden Shaco, which I first laughed about, but they're buffing the regular Shaco to be in power line of the same of the replica Forbidden Shaco. So instead of having a replica version from highest easily accessible or easier accessible, it will now drop as the regular Forbidden Shaco from Oshabi herself, which kind of warrants the rarity of her. I still think she's a little bit too rare, but I think it's a really good solution, to be honest. I actually really like it. Another good thing that stood out a lot was Quivers. The added damage on Quivers is extensively buffed. The added damage to attacks have been significantly improved. Can roll physical damage to attacks. The benchcraft on Quivers have been improved as well. There's a lot of things that have been added to Quivers for the sake of attack builds for bows. They've even made it to the Essence of Horrors, doing even more damage with the added cold damage per frenzy charge. There's so many buffs to Quivers. I'm personally not a big fan of bow builds, but I think this is something I should mention in this TLDR because it's an insanely big change. Another thing to mention, though, with Quivers is that they are now making it strictly for bow builds. If you are not wielding a bow when you have a Quiver equipped, it will be disabled. So that's a direct nerf to builds such as the Facebreaker. On the other hand, if you are not wielding a bow, you can't even equip the actual the quiver. You have to have a bow equipped to make the quiver work on the build. Another couple changes that happened is Harvest, and I was a little bit scared about the Harvest changes here because we know what they've done in the past. But the factual change to Harvest is very simple. It's a small one. The crafts that upgraded normal or magic items into rare with a specific modifier or more common specific modifier, they have been removed, and instead they will reforge, the craft itself will reforge normal, magic, or a rare item with whatever, let's say, cold or more common cold, right? And the crafts that did the reforge on rare can also reforge normal, magic, and rare. So this will mean that there's going to be a lot more reforge crafts that actually will be used that doesn't require you to scour the item prior to using the craft. So I think this is a great change. It's a small one, but I still think it's great and should be mentioned. Last but not least is Elemental Minions. Radiant Spirits, they are now converting all of their damage to fire, but with the removal of EE, that's going to be pretty painful. Damage dealt by Flame, Ice, and Lightning Golems has been increased by roughly 30% by all gem levels, which could potentially spark up the interest of running a Flame Golem build again, but I think the Carrion Golems with a physical approach will still be superior. So that is the biggest change to those minions. However, the big one is Syndicate Operatives. Honestly, this is such a big change. I will make a separate video about Syndicate Operatives, and we have waited years for them to fix the bug of them shotgunning, and we've prepped so many backup solutions to this happening, and we've just been waiting for it every patch now. And now it finally came. Shotguns will no longer happen on Syndicate Operatives. This means that they will only be good at clearing, and everything else they will suck ass on. End of story. The problem is that all of the backup solutions required Elemental Equilibrium. Instead, we are getting a mastery for Elemental Penetration, which is no way in hell going to be minus 50% penetration. That's just not going to happen. So I will have to make a separate video on Syndicate Operatives. The TLDR is basically that we're looking at hybrid Golem Syndicate Operatives, where the Syndicate Operatives will be using massive supports for clearing and having Carrion Golem single target. The other solution is the Lich Queen, that old school build I've been updating since 8 years back now. which is using skeletons for your single target and specters for your clearing, which is essentially the same thing as the Syndicate Operatives Golem approach. On the other hand, I'm going to need another day to go through these things, and I'll make a separate video going through the Syndicate Operatives and Spectres and the future of minions more in detail in the coming days. That's all I have to say with the patch notes. There's a lot more to be in there. A lot of small things like PvP changes. It's another thing I should mention, actually, is that it's no longer possible to create a PvP-only character, which means you can no longer make Spectre Banks. Rip that. But there's plenty of other changes. Make sure you read all the patch notes. It's about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 15 Bibles long. So I hope you'll have enough time to read it. And that's about it. So this is the TLDR with the things that I think stood out the most. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Make sure you read the entire patch notes. Hit the like button. Subscribe for more content. Until next time, stay safe. Keep rocking.